bit about ethical leadership. So in this module, we talk a little bit about what it means to be an ethical leader, and you get a chance to review the Texas Educator Code of Ethics, and you understand that ethics are obviously a very important part of leadership, and it sort of stems to be obvious that if we're thrusted or put into a leadership position, that we kind of need to lead with some ethics. But where does that ethical standard begin? Because everyone has a different standard for what ethics means to them. And everyone sort of has a different ethical origin story, if you will. So immediately sometimes when you think about ethics, you might think about religion. You might think about a religious background that may have driven sort of an ethical standard for yourself. And that's different for everyone, whatever that standard is. So you have to sort of put that in perspective. So when you're thinking about ethics outside of the obvious standards that are written and the expectations that are for educators, that's nice to sort of have that, because if, let's say, you're an individual that maybe you don't have an ethical origin story, as I put it, at least you have a list of standards that you can look at and go, okay, can I lead with these expectations? And so number one, it's good to have that. But number two, it's important for you to maybe sort of explore what that looks like for you. What does it mean to be an ethical leader? What does that mean to you? And when you're put in these positions of having to make ethical decisions, what drives those decisions that you're making? And the word that I can use for that, and we've talked about it plenty throughout our coursework, and I want to bring it up again here, is your value system. And so again, your value system might be driven by, say, your religious background, or how you were raised, maybe by grandparents or parents, or whatever your origin story is. But it's something that's worth exploring if you haven't done that. And so I want to encourage you, as you're exploring what it means to be ethical, what it means to be moral, what it means to have sort of a standard of the way that we treat one another and the way that we treat certain situations, you need to explore your value system. Throughout this module, as you're thinking about ethics, you'll want to be thinking about those two things. One, sort of your ethical origin story. What makes who you are? What is your personal standard when it comes to some of these decisions you have to make that sort of have ethical and moral roots? And then two, what is your value system? What are the values that you uphold that are important to you, whether they're religious-based or not? And you don't have to necessarily walk the talk of a certain religion or a certain background. You don't have to do that. But every religion has sort of a value system that they prescribe and subscribe for their followers. And that is unique to sort of having a religious standard that might be driving your moral and ethical values. If you don't have that religious standard, and that's fine, that you don't have to have that, then there needs to be sort of a value system that you establish for yourself that sort of helps drive some of these decision making. So, that's sort of my introduction here. Let me give you an example, and I have a TV example for you, which is kind of weird, and you may or may not watch this show, but it's Yellowstone. It's a show that's out now, and it's about this ranch family, and there's a lot of drama surrounding the land and the ranch and so on. If you're not watching the show, it's fine, but one of the characters in the show, his name is Casey. He was facing sort of a bit of an ethical dilemma, and I want to share the dilemma with you because I think it's important, the decision that he was facing. In this particular situation, a local rancher had committed suicide, and so Casey had to go and take care of the situation. The rancher committed suicide. He was obviously facing some debt and some issues. And Casey, being like a livestock commissioner person, he's in a portion of authority who has to handle some of these issues that comes up. He goes to the farm and he realizes that this rancher has left behind a family, a wife, and now all that debt that he escaped from through suicide has now been turned over to his family. So Casey realizes this. And now Casey is forced, as a decision maker, he's in a leadership position, he has to make a decision. Here's what he's being forced to do. The bank that the ranch has loans and mortgages under is going to come and take all the cattle and all the horses, and they're going to take that as part of the collateral that's necessary to pay the debts on the farm or on the ranch. That's something that has to be done now that there's no caretaker. The individual, the farmer, committed suicide. Casey realizes this, and so here's his dilemma. Do you let the farm go back to the bank? Do you let the ranch take the horses, take the cattle, Or, as the right thing to do in his heart and what he thought he should do, was round up some local individuals who could go ahead and sell that cattle, go ahead and sell those horses sort of in the middle of the night in another town, sort of away from, before the bank could find out. Take everything and go and sell it. Take that cash that you make from the sale of the horses and cattle and give it back to the family, so that the wife can bury her husband and so that she can feed her children and then maybe even keep the mortgage up or whatever she needs to do with the money. So there's your ethical dilemma. That's, a TV example of being part of that leadership dilemma. You are in a leadership position. You're expected to do something because there are legal parameters in place. The bank is supposed to take those horses and cattle. That's what they're supposed to do. And then Casey is deciding, I don't want the bank to have this. I want the wife to have this because her husband is gone. That's the decision he was forced to make. Again, this is a TV show, and these are characters it's fictitious, I get it, but it's a really good example of making an ethical or a moral choice based upon your values. And so what Casey decided to do was take those horses, take those cattle, and sell them and give that money to the spouse. He did that for two reasons. One, there was a political reason for doing it, because then all the ranchers in town would know that he did that, and then, he would get them on his side, and there was a political reason. But in his heart, and he ended up telling his father this later, it was just the right thing to do. Well, it was illegal. It was not, the right thing to do from that perspective. It was illegal for him to do that. But in his heart, he felt that he needed to help the wife, help the children who had lost their husband to suicide and facing losing their ranch. And without that money, they wouldn't be able to survive. So that is a great TV example of sort of an ethical decision. And if you watch Yellowstone, you know what I'm talking about. You saw that scene and everything, how it played out. And so I was still watching that, and I was thinking, this is a really good example of how we are faced with ethical choices and ethical dilemmas, whether we're conscious of them or not. But the key to this lesson in this course and at this moment in time, when we talk about ethical leadership has to be driven by a value system and sort of an ethical origin story. That's what I want you to explore. I want you to be thinking about, what is your ethical origin story? What are the values that you hold dear? What are some of the important aspects of your life that you will not compromise on because they're important to you? Let me give you a personal example on this. As many of you know, my son plays baseball, and I've talked extensively about his baseball team, and baseball is a big part of our life as a family, and we spend a lot of weekends on baseball fields. And he's been with the team now for quite some time, going on almost 2 years. And when you are part of a baseball team like this, and especially in this youth baseball, or when you're playing sort of select baseball, which is kind of another level, you get to know the parents, you get to know the families, you kind of become a family within a family when you're involved in baseball, and you're spending practically every weekend together in tournaments, and you're traveling out of town and spend times in hotels and barbecues and, having a cold beverage together and those kinds of things. You just sort of develop friendships, especially when you play 50 or 75 games over the course of the season. So nonetheless, you get to know the families, and obviously you get to know the players, you get to know the kids. And my son plays with another player who just happens to have a stutter. He stutters. It's sort of a speech problem that he's had since he was a kid. He's working through it. Certainly has improved a lot over the years, but he stutters. Takes him a little bit to sort of get going what he needs to say. And it's a part of him. It's something that you accept. It's a disability that he has. So you know that about the kid, and he's working through it. And so one of our value systems, going back to that conversation that we have in our house, is that we don't let anyone make fun of that child, number one. Anyone that's disabled, we defend those individuals. That's a part of our family's value systems. So if I ever heard a child or an adult making fun of this player, we would immediately say something to that individual because it's inappropriate. We believe that. This happened. We have some new players this season. We have some new players that have come on, and they obviously are trying to feel their way around on the team, and they don't know each other. But kids can be kids, and I say that flippantly, but it's true. And one of the new players has recently made fun of this player that has the stutter, and my son was upset about it. And now he didn't hear it. He didn't hear it happen, so he hasn't addressed it. But he, wanted to make sure that I was okay with him addressing the issue if he heard this new player making fun of this player with the stutter. And my answer is yes, because one of our value systems is we do not let that behavior continue. We will tell an individual who's, making fun of somebody with a disability or a stutter or whatever, that that's unacceptable behavior and we won't tolerate it. And it's not something you have to get in a fight over. It's not something that you have to, get all angry about and spout foul words or anything like that. But you do address it, and you address it in a way that's healthy. To say, hey, on this team, we don't act this way. We don't make fun of our players. Just to make sure that individuals know that, that is unacceptable behavior for our team to do that to another teammate. And so I shared that with my son because that is a part of our value system. Any time that we would hear someone, in the outside world not treating others with respect or with the dignity that they deserve, then we would certainly say something or intervene if we had to do that, because that's part of our value system, and that's an ethical behavior that's important to us. So you may not have been involved in a situation like that. That may not be something that you have had experience with, but if you have, certainly you have an ethical origin story, as I put it, to make that sort of decision. How would you react in that sort of scenario? What's important to you? And everyone reacts differently, obviously. There's a couple of examples I wanted to share, just sort of a TV example and a real life example of what ethical leadership means. And again, just a reminder, it begins with an origin story, whatever that looks like for you. And two, it begins with value systems that sort of drive your leadership and your leadership decision making. We explored values in our 5330 class, the principalship class. This might be a good example, a good time for you to go back and review those values, review that value system, and make sure that it's still aligned with your leadership. As you're getting ready to finish, you're getting ready to wrap up and start testing and get your certification and start looking for jobs. Now is the time to maybe revisit, those values, because they will drive your leadership and they will drive your decision making. So as you're working through this module, I want you to keep those things in mind, explore those concepts, and work through what you feel is best when it comes to ethical leadership for you.
Specifically for our conversation today, I want to talk about developing or building teacher capacity. So as you're talking, hopefully you're not in your car or at the gym or wherever you're listening to the podcast, this is an opportunity. You might want to take a little bit of notes if you're listening, or just, sort of jot some things down, sort of food for thought when it comes to building teacher capacity. I don't want to pretend that the process of building or developing a teacher's capacity is easy, but let's talk about that term capacity. What the word capacity really means is that, it's a container. It's how much can fit into a container. So if you think of a teacher's capacity as you think of it as growth, how much more can a teacher grow? How can we expand their capacity for learning? Obviously, when we come out of our undergraduate programs, we don't know it all. We go into our classes, and then we come out of student teaching, and some of us have had great student teaching experiences, and some of us don't have very good student teaching experiences. I think back to my student teaching experience long ago, and my supervising teacher, who was a geography teacher, really was just kind of going through the motions. He was a worksheet-driven kind of guy, and that's not exactly the kind of teacher that I wanted to be. So I kind of had to, worm my way through learning how to be a teacher before I landed my first job. So for many of us, especially this first 2-3 years of the job, we kind of learn it as we go. Maybe we have a mentor or someone around us that we can ask questions of, but it becomes more difficult for some teachers if you are, say, working in a large middle school or a very large high school. Now, I want to talk about that for a minute, because some of our high schools, particularly in Texas, we build them big. We have some very large campuses and some very large schools, and it's just more efficient to do it that way when you look at it from a financial perspective. Some of these large 6A high schools have between 2,700 and 5,000 students sometimes. That's like a small town when you put it in perspective. Some high schools in Texas are bigger than some small towns in Texas. So imagine being the principal of that campus and trying to build teacher capacity. There's no way that principal is going to know everything that's going on at that school. every teacher, every curriculum, every student's needs. Even with a staff of administrators, which some of those high schools are likely going to have, they're not going to know. They're not going to know everything. It becomes very, very difficult. So what do? You're still responsible for walkthroughs and observations. You're still responsible for student achievement. You're still responsible for growing your teachers and student success. So what do? You have to rely on the folks that are around you. You have to rely on the experts that are in the building. That leads us to point number 1 that I want to make. As a principal, whether you're working at the lowest of the low school, elementary, pre-K, middle school, high school, it doesn't matter. What you want to do is try to find and encourage your existing teacher leaders. There are folks on that campus that have a wealth of experience, whether it's from their education, their certifications, their background, or maybe just even their experience on that campus. So if you come to a school and you're brand new at that school and you don't really know, one of the first things you should be doing is seeking those individuals, seeking their counsel, and seeking their support. And then start to believe in them. Start to understand what they can provide to help support you as a campus principal. These teacher leaders are the ones that are really going to be the people that can help you be successful. So you've got to rely on them. You've got to encourage them. And you've got to support them, because they're the ones that are going to be carrying your message around the school. So they become sort of quasi-administrators in a sense, but if they start walking and talking the same way that you are, it'll be a huge difference among the others in staff. That leads us to number 2, teacher morale. You got to believe in your teachers. And this goes beyond jeans days or casual Fridays or school luncheons or Sonic days or whatever it is that you do to make people happy. That's climate. I'm talking about culture. I'm talking about believing in your teachers, telling that you believe in them, trusting them that they know students, they understand curriculum, they know their content, and they know instruction. It's time that we started treating teachers like the professionals they are. And what that means is, to be a professional, that means you are highly paid because you were experienced, you were degreed, and you were certified. And principals need to understand the value that teachers bring to the school. So much of what we do in education now has become prescriptive. We are driven by standardized tests. We are driven by school board policy. We are driven by these high, lofty expectations sometimes that we forget the essence of what we do is we're in the people business. We deal with parents, we deal with students, we deal with teachers, and we have to start dealing with them at the human level. Well, that means creating a culture and a climate where people know that you believe in the work that they're doing. And if they know that you believe in them, they will bend over backwards. So we talk about building relationships all the time, but it really comes down to teacher morale. How are you going to support them as a professional? How are you going to let them know that the work that they do is valuable each and every day? And that, most importantly, you trust in the work that they do. So start to look for ways to develop trust in your teachers. Number 3, well, after I just said all that about trust and belief, you still got to set expectations. You've got to set expectations, and then you have to inspect what you expect, meaning go into the classrooms, observe, participate in those discussions with teachers, and make sure that they are doing the job that you want them to do. You can't just let them go rogue. Not everybody's good at this work. Some people will go into education because of the great summers, and it's fairly decent pay if you work in some areas of Texas. But you still got to follow up, and you've got to make sure that people are doing what they're doing. So that means having a close counsel around you that can go in and be supportive of you and let you know what's happening on your campus and and most importantly, not happening on your campus. So be prepared to set those expectations, set good and high expectations just like you do for your students, but inspect what you expect. Number 4, I want to talk about professional learning communities for a minute, or those dreaded PLCs. I have a message for you all. You're doing PLCs wrong. A lot of campuses and a lot of schools have been doing PLCs wrong for a long time. Now, as I start to describe what a PLC should be doing, if your school is doing it, or you've seen it done on your campus or other campuses, that's great. I'm not here to disparage what you're doing. I'm not here to disparage what anybody else is doing. I'm here to tell you what a PLC really should look like. Because what PLCs have turned into is where teachers sit around and look at student data. And that's fine, but that's supposed to be one tiny part of what a PLC does. Looking at data, then they trade lesson plans, and they discuss maybe some student achievement, maybe you unpack your TEKs. That's what PLCs have become. Here's what they should have been done. PLCs were originally designed to be discussions about instruction, not just data. Yes, your data aids your instruction, and you've got to have data somewhere to tell you if your teaching is doing well. That's fine. But most of the conversations that teachers should be having in PLC should be about instruction. It should be about how to differentiate. It should be about how the brain learns, how our students are grasping contents. We're spending all this time unpacking standards. You know your standards by now, or at least you should. And then we spend all this time unpacking curriculum because it's either written for you by your district or you're using some pre-bought, pre-packaged stuff that your district's providing for you. Whatever it is, it's likely the same curriculum you've been using. So spending all this time unpacking standards and unpacking curriculum is not a good use of PLC time. You should be talking about instruction. You should be talking about how to teach this material, how to reach the students. And sure, use student data to help drive those conversations, but the conversation should be around instruction. Number 2, it should be about you improving your craft as a teacher. Being a teacher means it's a practice. You know, doctors run a practice. That's what they do. Now, you hate to think that your doctor's practicing on you, but they actually are. And unfortunately, doctors sometimes make mistakes. Well, guess what? Teachers make mistakes too. That's why it's a practice. We're constantly getting better. We're constantly trying to improve. And sometimes we need people around us to tell us that we're not doing things right or we could do something better. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, we expect principals to do that, but we know principals don't always have the time. So wouldn't it be great if we could rely on other people around us in our professional learning community? That's literally what it's called. A PLC is a professional learning community where you can learn and support and gain new skills. That's why the conversation should really be more about instruction. Part 3 of PLCs that you're likely not doing. You're likely not experimenting. You're likely not trying new things. You're likely thinking that I don't have time to try anything new because everything is so prescribed and tailored for me. And that may or may not be true too. But what's wrong with trying something every now and then to see if it works? Because again, teaching is a practice. So PLCs is where you should have some room for experimentation to see if there's something out there that's not working or working for your students that you can try. The last part of PLCs that you're likely not doing because frankly it probably weirds you out to even think about it is peer observation and support. Imagine a scenario where you actually went into another teacher's classroom and you watched them teach. Maybe you learned from them, or maybe you could give them some feedback on your teaching. You know, that's how a lot of young tennis players learn how to play. They learn how to play by watching other tennis players and then giving them feedback on what they saw and what they didn't see. Many of you have heard that I am a baseball umpire. This is my first season being an umpire, and you know, learning to be an umpire sometimes takes some support from other umpires. The way we do it is we go and watch other games. We watch other umpires. And then when we're out on the field, other umpires watch us. And they give us feedback. And they tell us what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, how we could fix some of our techniques, some of our methodology of how we make calls or our positions on the field. Then we get this from other veteran umpires who've been out there and have earned some of those what we call umpire scars from bad calls they've made or bad positions they've been in or rule mistakes that they've made. You know, on the baseball field, it's not that big a deal to make a mistake. Sure, people are going to get mad at you and you might get yelled at or whatever happens. But when it comes to kids, man, that's tough if you're making a mistake with kids. Peer observation, supporting each other, giving each other feedback, watching each other teach, evaluating each other's lesson plans, that should also be part of your PLC. PLCs, professional learning communities, should be a collection of some of those things that you're likely not doing because a lot of schools don't do PLCs very well. PLCs are all about data, all about test scores, and all about unpacking standards. And I'm hoping that if you're part of a PLC, it's a lot more than just that. Number 5, relationship building. Now, I talked a little bit about this earlier when I said teacher morale, but relationship building means connecting with humans on another level other than just being their boss. Now, I'm not saying go out and have dinner with them or go to the movies or anything like that. Certainly no happy hours. I wouldn't condone or advise that as an administrator. It was never for me. Some of my colleagues, maybe they could separate the two, but I really couldn't. It makes it much more difficult when you have to fire somebody or non-renew them if you just went out and had drinks with them the night before. To me, that never really worked. But relationship building means maybe you know a little bit about their kids. Maybe you know about their hobbies. Maybe you understand where they go to church, or some of the things that are really, really important to them. Having those little subtle conversations about, your weekend, or, a kid's soccer game, or, when they sing at the church choir, those little details really resonate with people because it shows that you care beyond just the work that's done every single day. In the end, we're all humans. We all have families and responsibilities outside the four walls of a classroom. And while teaching is a calling and it's a career and all those wonderful things that come with education, the reality is many of us are likely not doing it unless we're not being paid for it, because we are professionals in the end, right? So building relationships really means connecting with folks on a human level. Not saying you're going to be perfect at it the first time you try it, but it's something that you should be doing on a regular basis. Look for ways to build relationships and connect with people at a human level so that they can understand that you really care for them beyond just the work that they do for you as your school leader. The last thing that I would recommend on how to develop teaching capacity is you got to make the talk of instruction be part of your school culture. It's just got to be something that comes from the teacher leaders that you created. It comes through coaching and mentoring, conversations that are constant about instruction. It's just got to be part of your conversations. So much of what we do as teachers is personal, and we feel like we're isolated inside the four walls of our classroom, and maybe we know better. But most of the time, teachers really just know their content. There might be really good math teachers or really good science teachers because they know their content really, really well. And that's fine. But we've got to start talking about good instruction, good differentiation, how to reach students that are difficult to reach. We got to be talking about how the brain learns. We got to be talking about small group instruction, how to work with 504 and special ed students. These should be constant conversations about how are we getting better at teaching. If you make that a part of your school's vernacular, where everything you do and say revolves around teaching, instruction, improvement, professional development, eventually people are going to catch on that what we do here is teach. We have good teaching, we have good instruction. And it's not always just rooted in test scores or curriculum or some of those other things that really bog us down. It should be about the fun of teaching again. Teachers and students really enjoy what they're doing if they care about the lessons and the teaching that's happening. Students are really, really engaged if they love the teaching. Good teaching equals great engagement. And that's where students really learn and they really gain a lot of information. So make teaching the talk of instruction, talking about instruction, making it a part of your school's culture and your school's vernacular. All right, that's all I have for building teacher capacity. Let's talk about this more in our discussion post on campus. We'll see you next time.